thank you, Prudence, and thank you for coming out tonight to hear some poems and a talk. As we discussed what to do together, Prudence said, you know, there's going to be an English major career fair the next day. Would you talk a little bit about, to the Sigma Tau Delta and to the people who come, about the humanities and the humanities now? So I'm going to do that. I read the other group a North Carolina poem. I'm going to read you a North Carolina poem for my grandmother, who grew up here, went to UNCG, and is from Ashe County near Boone. This poem is actually about her grandmother, who is also from that area. Big Granny. When they found Emmeline, a nail held her sack dress together at the neck. She lived by gathering herbs for curing leather, lived off land her people held since they took it from the Cherokee. Quilted mountainsides in Appalachia, where they hewed walnut into rocking chairs and sang the stony country's blessings be, and ballads carried in their ears from Scotland. From my grandmother, her granddaughter, I have one word in her dialect, stam. Long half rhyme with steam, its meaning, not enough, as there's nary stam of tea nor sugar nor. In iron light, in the mountain graveyard, her clan's settler stones grow up with moss thick as harmonies in shape note tune. In those woods, a shadowy foundation, they took apart her house to save the boards. Hello, English majors. Hello, humanists. It's an honor to address you tonight. Some of us just spent time talking about poems and poetry earlier when I had the chance to be part of the lovely induction ceremony for Sigma Tau Delta. It's a joy to be with you now. When I talked to my friend Ashley Pattison, an honors senior English major at UC Berkeley, where I sometimes teach, I asked what she might want to hear. And she said, all I want to hear is that what I chose to do has real value and these skills are necessary. Please just tell me I'm going to be okay. In short, she said, let me know it's okay to be an English major. It's okay to be an English major. It's okay to study rhetoric or anthropology or French or Russian or Greek. It's okay to study theater or drama or any of what we call the liberal arts. It's okay to be a humanist. Are you reassured? Can I go home now? Thanks, Prudence. No, seriously, when Ashley and I were talking, I could relate because I felt the same way when I graduated from Amherst College more years ago now than seems reasonable to me to admit. During my time there, I discovered in fits and starts, and then with deepening conviction, that I wanted to be a writer. And upon admitting to this to myself, I was awash in shame because I didn't only want to be a writer, I wanted to be a poet. How embarrassing. Many of my friends had so much more organized sounding plans. They sounded legitimate. They were going to go to law school or work for consulting firms or take an extra year of biology and suddenly become pre-med. They were even going to work for these newfangled sounding things called internet startups. And there I was, moving to Brooklyn and waitressing in a funeral parlor turned pasta restaurant, using my spare time to go to the New York Public Library to read. I was akimbo to the world, and sometimes working from my apartment, the only neighbor I would see was a fat iguana who'd peek out the fourth-story window of the building facing me and try to catch the afternoon sun. He'd shake his wattles at me. He'd preen. The iguana kept me company. With his company, I read a lot of Elizabeth Bishop. It was all really nerve-wracking. Of what use was this thing that I was attempting? I didn't know many people in the literary world, and it took me some time to find people who could help me. And while I was waiting, I waitressed a lot and ate free pasta from the restaurant and read the collected letters of Emily Dickinson and John Keats. And for those of you who do want to write, I do recommend reading the letters of other writers because then you get a sense of their days and their daydreams and their social lives and the ways they got work and how they cultivate literary friendships. And you have a sense of a working writer's life. The days felt aimless, but I look back and think of them as some of the richest times in my life. I was out of college and reading voraciously and making sense of my own life on my own terms for the first time ever. And this was wonderful. I felt like I began to take full responsibility for having an intellectual life outside of any classes. I realized I was free, but I was still in love with books. And little by little, I got more comfortable with the idea that there were people who were working writers, who made a life this way, who continued to write and share work and ideas with each other. I saw that this life was made up of hard work and doggedness and also good luck and friendships. And I had time to calm down and come to understand that writing, no less than law or medicine or internet commerce, was a profession. Luckily, it was also a calling. And I centered myself on the idea that I had come to writing because I believe in the something that literature is doing. I believe in literature's value, its use. Raise your hand if you've ever had this sinking feeling. I love this, but what if there's no use for it? Or if you've heard that question, oh, it's nice that you're an English major, but what are you going to do with that? Raise your hand, or if some person or cultural force made you feel somehow guilty that in the face of all the crises in the world, you like to read Tolstoy or Jane Austen or Toni Morrison or Shakespeare or Entezaki Shange or Chinua Achebe or Charles Dickens. Oh, I feel your pain. Raise your hand if you've ever been made to feel guilty that you like poems. Oh, so you like to read. What are you going to do with that? Yes, of what use? Of what use? What are you going to do? Maybe there's no specific mean person, or maybe there is, but there's some inner utilitarian poo-pooing you. Maybe you have an inner Scrooge. Mine is a really hopelessly bored man who perches on my left shoulder and rolls his eyes and seems ready to get on with getting his return on investment. He doesn't even call it that because he doesn't really like words that much enough to say it, so he says ROI. He's the kind of person that speaks in acronyms. Is there an ROI here? Is there an ROI here? He's kind of a jerk, actually, and he hounds me along some days. But I put up with him as a devil's advocate also because sometimes we have a productive argument. When this particular person starts talking in a sniping voice, it is tempting to defend literature using the rhetoric of other disciplines. Maybe you do this too. You hear yourself telling someone that you found a scientific study or market research that proves that it's okay to love books. For instance, here's this lovely headline from Inside Higher Ed. Studies find humanities majors land jobs and are happy in them. That's a headline. It's a news. Take that, you can say to your inner voice. I have a shot at a job and I might even be happy. It's telling that Inside Higher Ed thought that this needed to be a headline. The article goes on to say that while there may be a pay gap with math or science fields, humanities majors are by and large content and fulfilled by their work and are by and large employed and do not by and large feel underpaid. They may or may not actually discuss poetry or novels or Greek drama at their jobs, but they've learned to be effective communicators. Literature majors know how to write clearly. They know how to see the stories and the data points. Humanists, let's pause there. For this itself is important. Let us praise people who can see the stories and data points. You, perhaps more than math majors, know how to connect the dots in important, complex ways. You believe in narrative which is made of many complicated connections of dots. And in connecting dots into stories, you do venerable work. You're the same group of people who looked at the stars and came up with constellations. Please do not undersell this. Reading the stars is no less valuable than it was thousands of years ago. People may feel that they can mostly ignore the literal stars, which is too bad because they really are lovely. But nevertheless, there are a lot of funny data points on the grid that grid our lives. For instance, for years my husband has worked in the big data part of the tech world for Twitter and LinkedIn. And during those years, while printing out report after report, derived by algorithm after algorithm, he fought to keep one amazing employee on. And the employee wasn't a data scientist, and she wasn't a math major, and she hadn't studied computers. Instead, she was a theater major with a background in dramaturgy. She wrote plays, and better than anyone else on my husband's team, she knew story. She could see how the lines and the dots and the curves that the algorithm spat out might be formed into a narrative. And once she saw the narrative, she could explain it clearly. She could write it down. She could tell us what it might mean or come to mean, and she was an invaluable companion to my husband's work. The truth is that when the algorithm is done saying what it will say, we all still need someone to tell us the story of what we found. As, even when the oracle has spoken, it still needs its interpreters. It's not useful to take data and turn it into more data. What we crave is people who can give data shapes, who can give us information in a shape by which we can absorb it into our lives. And for most of us, the true shape, the true flexible, durable, portable shapes, we most easily take with us our story shapes, language shapes. The story is a unit of meaning that puts our lives in relation to one another. The story is a primal building block scaled to the human mind. As Muriel Rukeyser said, the universe is made of stories, not of atoms. The playwright could see this. The universe is made of stories, not of atoms. Take that with you, humanists. Think of the fact that you have spent your time studying the portable, durable, flexible forms in which we arrive at meaning. Take heart in the fact that you have been studying stories and patterns and the way language sounds and feels. Take heart in the fact that you know about oracles and myths and about the beautiful ways that myths can stretch or fold. However, since we're praising stories, I'm going to tell you one. Recently at a science museum, after spending the day with various exhibits, my 3-year-old daughter and I ended up in front of a redwood tree. And in front of the redwood tree was a telephone. And you'd pick up the phone and sit, and there the phone would tell you a story about the forest. And this was perhaps our favorite place. We spent a lot of time there. Here's one story. A baby spider approaches a redwood tree on a burned-out forest floor. It's a very small sprout of a redwood tree, a baby redwood tree. And the spider says, "Little tree in the big forest, can I help you? California, where we live, is very dry. But if I weave my web around you, you'll catch the fog in it, and the water will drop onto your roots, and you will grow strong." And the tree said yes, and it was so. And over the years, the spider's web and the redwood bark harvested the fog, and the fog dripped down the tree, and the tree grew bigger and bigger. And finally, the tree grew to be 200 feet tall and was one of the tallest organisms on Earth. And now the spider came to the redwood and said, "Redwood, now that I have helped you, will you help me?" And the great redwood said, "Oh, but how can I possibly help you?" And the spider said, "I want to climb up your branches and set my egg sacs on the wind. And if I climb high, I can let them go far and wide, and my children will have new places to live, and the forest will grow." It's a very simple kind of story, that story shape. But inside it is the surprise of symbiosis, the way unlike things are actually in tension. The story itself is a web. It draws us closer to the world. It draws the world closer to us. And it is also light as a baby spider floating on the wind in an egg sac. It is also durable and long-lasting, and perhaps as ever-living as the redwood tree. The story was the most memorable thing we absorbed at the Science Museum that day. I'm sure I could tell it to you again as long as I live. And I'm sure that some of you actually could tell it again when you leave here tonight. In the Museum of Science, I say again, we come back to the story. We needed the story to access science. The story was what allowed us into the relationships, the site in which we cultivated our understanding. Once again, I think Muriel Rukeyser is right. The universe is made of stories, not of atoms. But since we're on the subject of science, let's use it. Let's talk about why it's okay to be a humanist. I'll tell you what science says to students of literature. It turns out that they're doing experiments on us. They put nodes on our heads and they watch our brains light up, and they give us CAT scans. This is the kind of experiment they do sometimes when they're trying to confirm things I didn't think needed confirming. For instance, working this way, scientists have also confirmed the idea that taking a walk in nature can make you feel better. I didn't know that needed to be studied, but I'm glad that it's verified that way. So, with the nodes on your head and the things all hooked up to the CAT scans, it turns out that reading is good like taking a walk is good. It activates multiple parts of your brain, and you emerge from deep reading happier, less stressed out, and with your brain more widely awake. Reading a good book activates enormous swaths of your brains, complicated ones, parts related to being cognitive and attentive and emotional all at once. Reading teaches you that feeling and thinking are linked, are the same. Reading teaches you how to better understand others and yourself. I will read you from one recent study. Understanding others' mental states is a crucial skill that enables the complex social relationships that characterize human societies. Reading, in short, is a tool for empathy. David Comer Kidd and Emanuele Castano said so. It is good to be a student of literature because it engages your widest brain and makes you likely to be a fully empathetic human. Okay. Let's recap. You're okay, humanists. You may get a job. You're likely to be happy. You're going to write and think clearly and see complex patterns in the stars or the data or the life around you. And reading books is good for you. You will be empathetic. You will be able to hold complex states with yourself and others in tension. You will be able to imagine and empathize with the lives of others. And again, please, dear humanists, the world right now desperately needs more empathy. Lord knows the world needs you. Do you feel a little better? Maybe even now the grumpy man is still nagging and he's saying, yeah, empathy. Yeah, what are you going to do with that? Well, what are you going to do with it? And how are you going to do it? Because the world is so full of things that need doing, and yet it's also sometimes extremely hard to know how to do them. When I teach freshmen at UC Berkeley, I end up telling them about an article by Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman that predicts, like many studies, that practically all our jobs are soon going to be automated. And this will create an enormous gulf between people who do certain kinds of manual labor that cannot be automated, farming, cleaning, possibly the raising of children, and those people who provide irreplaceable cognitive labor or think unautomatable thoughts. Now, I admit that this sounds utterly dystopian to me. Are you panicking too? Can child raising be automated? Can the pleasure we take in eating and preparing food be automated? How many of our thoughts are really automatic? Can our thinking be automated? This problem looms large, and for me, it adds real urgency to what we do when we study the humanities. I acknowledge on this day, after this very hard weekend, but also many hard things going on, that it can feel very hard to be human these days, let alone to be a humanist. There are lots of days of late that grind me down into numbness and sorrow, and there's a tremendous onslaught of confusing news, a sense that maybe everything that's told us is in one way or another fake, without actually having the decency to be fictional. And no matter where we stand on the political spectrum of these times, we may well feel worn down by the ever-present cultural violence, violent rhetoric, or actual guns. And still behind it all is the question, what are we here to be human for? What about us is irreplaceably human? I mean, if there's not a better reason to be a humanist than to keep asking this question, we are going to need to continue to ask it. We are going to need to answer it with our thoughts and our lives. And as we do, we may feel more and more like the folk laborer John Henry. Has anyone here heard of John Henry? He's a folk figure. Can you raise your hand if you have? Good. Some of you have. He's a folk figure, a railroad worker, and he's remembered in a ballad from the 1840s, a time when free and enslaved blacks, as well as recently immigrated Irish, were building railroads all over the South. And John Henry was a legendary laborer, and when he showed up for his job, he was told that the steam grill was going to do his job instead. And it's a ballad, so it's handed down to us through the ear. But it's recorded in really good versions. I recommend the Harry Belafonte version. And I'm just going to actually take the risk of singing to you what John Henry replied. "Well, John Henry, he said to his captain, he said, a man ain't nothing but a man. But before I let the steam drill beat me down, I'm gonna die with the hammer in my hand, Lord, Lord, die with the hammer in my hand." And then he went and raced with the machine. It seems like we too are going to have to race with machines. And those things which we still do are going to be those things which are irreplaceably human, movements of body or mind that no one can automate. And we must figure out how to do these things only we can do. As I stumble upon that phrasing, it reminds me a bit of advice that I got when I became a writer all those years ago in the era of the fat iguana. Write only those things only you can write. Write only those things only you can write. Use writing, that is, to express and explore what is irreplaceably singular about your life, your story, your voice, the world you see. That is to say, don't be an automaton. But what is the opposite of being an automaton? Does being automated have an opposite? It seems to me that perhaps it has two opposites. One opposite of living in the specific as opposed to the general, and the opposite of being surprising instead of predictable. And it seems to me, fortunately, that literature is valuable to us now and always because it is both specific and surprising. Literature helps us to live in specificity and surprise. About specificity, there are no ideas but in things, said William Carlos Williams, and it seems that good advice for emerging writers is to engage with detail and intimacy and care the world around them, to savor place names and local geology and fauna and dialect, to be hungry for details. Here, just outside the window in North Carolina, is a tree called the loblolly and another tree called the turkey oak. And I have always loved North Carolina for that. I suppose for me, half the pleasure of being a writer might be getting to wander around, muttering the word loblolly many times. Loblolly. Loblolly. It gets better if you drawl. On the train down here, I found myself looking at the cotton fields and the turkey oaks and the loblollies turning the high burnished rust color they do in the fall, and admiring how the cotton fields seemed whiter than the clouds, surprising me really because it seemed at first they might be snow. And then I thought about how I love literature because it helps us come to live inside our lives a little bit more, to live inside our specificities. Good writing gives us that. Look, I am now someone lucky enough to make a living savoring the names of things. And I'm also a poet, so in talking about this need for specificity and surprise, I might also be talking about reading, and I might also be talking about life. Toni Morrison famously said that writing and reading are not all that different for writers. And as a reader, I recognize that literature is a place in which I come to feel alive and startled and awake to my own thinking. I come to books to be closer to some quivering bright flame of life. I am going to widen this beyond myself to say that literature is valuable to us because it puts us in touch with whatever in us is unautomatable, which is surprising, which is singular. It allows us to take pleasure in whatever is not automatable about our days. I began this process by circling other disciplines, by saying that you are probably going to find a job, by saying that science defends what reading does to your brain. But I moved towards closing by saying that literature has its value and use, not by making recourse to those other disciplines, but because good literature surprises you and connects you with yourself and removes you from yourself and startles you and wakes you up, and in so doing helps you to access those parts of yourself which are singular. Literature is what cannot be automated away, which escapes us, in which we ourselves also escape. A poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom, said Robert Frost. And wouldn't it be lovely if we felt the same way about our lives? That somehow we learned from reading and writing poems and literature how to surprise ourselves, how to live the lives that only we could lead. A poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. Now maybe I am finally getting around to saying what I really wanted to say all along, and the man on my shoulder who's so grumpy hasn't been letting me say. I say the poem and your study of it begins in delight. It doesn't begin in return on investment or in the brain hooked up to the machine that confirms that the brain is engaged by the poem. It begins because you are delighted by your reading, and your delight leads you towards wisdom. That delight is the heat that propels you through the world, just the same way the iguana near my old apartment needed the sun. So here's what I have to say, dear humanists. By choosing to be a humanist, by learning the crafts of language and literature, you are honoring and cultivating and learning about your own delight. In honoring that delight, you are building the ecosystems of understanding and attention for yourself and also for the world. By beginning in and lingering in that delight, you are affirming that your bodies and lives as they tendrilled out toward the world have a right to that delight, and that that delight can be a principle by which you come to guide your life. Tomorrow there's a career fair. There are many good jobs out there, and many of them will ask you to use words carefully, and you may go into a field that asks you to write legal documents or advertisements or copy for magazines. And this is good. The life of language is good work. I would also say this: keep believing that the life of language and the life of literature will nourish what is most singular and unautomatable about you. Keep nourishing this inside yourselves. Read the new Emily Wilson translation of the Odyssey aloud to someone you love. Commit some poems to heart. Let yourself keep writing a few poems if you can get the grumpy return on investment man to knock off and shut up for a bit. Visit a bookstore once a month or week and keep a book by your bed or on your train ride to work if you have one. Read something big and naughty and hard for pleasure. Keep engaging these meaningful shapes. This is not algebra, so I am not going to draw a simple straight line between this and your success and happiness. However, I believe that if you do these things, you will be nourishing yourself as a successful, singular being. You will be cultivating unautomatable thoughts. I mentioned earlier the figure of John Henry, and the end of the song goes like this. Well, John Henry was hammering on the mountain, and his hammer was striking fine, but he hammered so hard that he broke his poor old heart, and he laid down his hammer and he died, Lord, Lord, he laid down his hammer and he died. Well, they took John Henry to the White House, and they buried him in the sand, and every locomotive that comes roaring by says, there lies a steel-driving man, Lord, Lord, there lies a steel-driving man. As a small aside, a few years back when we finally did visit the White House, my son was so excited. I told him that this was where Barack Obama lived. And he said, no, I want to see John Henry. Listen, John Henry died with the hammer in his hand. He died with the hammer in his hand. And he's also still with us. And I'm going to say now what the poet Seamus Heaney said. He'd been working out whether or not it was okay to keep writing poems during the incredibly violent time that was the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It was 30 years of horrendous and haunting violence, daily bombings on buses and bars, horrible episodes tearing the fabric of a country apart. And there's part of that what we might recognize now about a country that seems to be coming apart at the seams, or at least under great stress. A country that occasionally, while fracturing, seems full of incredible sadness. Here is what Seamus Heaney said. Here is the great paradox of poetry and of the imaginative arts in general. Faced with the brutality of the historic onslaught, they are practically useless. No poem has ever stopped a tank. Yet they verify our singularity. They strike and stake out the ore of self that lies at the base of every individuated life. They verify our singularity. They strike and stake out the ore of self that lies at the base of every individuated life. They strike and stake, no less than John Henry hammering the mountain open. There it is, the hammer in your hand, dear humanists, the imaginative arts that are helping to strike and stake out the ore of you. It's the hammer by which you find not the world, but yourself. I'll say it again. Literature helps to strike and stake the ore of self, which is at the base of every individuated life. And I'll probably say it again at the conference in March for those of you who are going to come and hear me speak then. And I say it often these days. I repeat it. I say it to quiet the grumpy man on my shoulder and in my heart and in my heartbreak about part of what is happening to this. I would say that I believe in those places where we each go to feel our own individual private humanity, where we can go to enlarge our thinking and feeling. I believe more widely that in interacting with literature, with these humanistic arts, we find ourselves, and in finding ourselves, we enable ourselves to become empathetic moral actors. And this is the hammer which I wish that you each keep taking up, the hammer with which you find your lives. And may those lives be rich and singular. Thank you.